In this tutorial, we are going to cover voles, shove voles. Voles give quite a few unique opportunities. They have two really big bonuses going for them on top of all the other critters in existence, despite the difficulties of farming them. The first is they drop 5 times as much meat as any other critter. It's enough to make 5 barbecues or feed 20 duplicants for a day. It is ridiculous how much meat they drop. But that is not even the most beneficial thing about them. The second is they don't get overcrowded. Most critters, if you put them in too confined a space or you put too many of them in one area, they get an overcrowded debuff that decreases their reproduction rates by about 80%. It effectively counteracts all your taming and makes them the same as wild critters. They'll drop 1 egg before they die. But voles do not have that debuff. It's just not possible for them to achieve it, no matter what you do with them. You could cram 1,000 of them into a single tile. Wouldn't make a difference. This allows you to just let their eggs drop on the ground and they will hatch inside the same room you're grooming and feeding them in. This makes it insanely simplifies things. You don't need any separate rooms to incubate them in. You don't need to move them out when too many accumulate. You can just let them, well, you can let them max out. You could keep 100 of them in here, and so long as I had enough grooming stations and duplicants to man them, I could keep them all happy and dropping even more eggs, and also dropping my frame rate. Now, there are multiple downsides of them to counteract this huge bonus. The first is they can burrow through anything that is not refined metals. And by refined metals, I'm using iron here, but you could also use gold, steel, um, termium, tungsten, that kind of thing. But iron is cheap, it falls from the sky, and a quick iron box takes care of most of your problems. However, do not use pneumatic doors to seal them in. Mechanical airlocks and manual airlocks, they're not really coded for working with critters. You have to use pneumatic doors. If you use one of these two, they will get out. They will be able to, even if you make them out of steel, they won't so much burrow through them, but the moment a duplicant enters the room, one of them will manage to sneak out occasionally. If you put in pneumatic doors stop them from escaping. This, of course, leads to some problems because pneumatic doors have airflow, and you're probably going to be using these in space. I've made the doors here out of niobium because I don't want the doors overheating. I did have some overheating issues with this because you are bringing in regolith to feed them, and the regolith is usually coming in at somewhere between 2 to 300 degrees, depending on where you're sourcing it from, and it can get quite toasty in here. So niobium doors or termium and iron to go around the outside, and you've got a nice sealed room to keep them in. So it is quite an investment. Now, one of the annoyances here is they do actually vomit up half of what they eat. So as you can see here, they've actually vomited up a big lump of regolith right inside the actual doorway itself. Oh, by the way, these are just wild voles I'm keeping in reserve. So this can cause issues. I have had this happen down here before, and somehow 2 voles got out around the same time. So I think it is possible for voles to burrow through an entombed part of a door, even if it is made of an impenetrable metal. So I haven't actually witnessed it. All I had was the 2 voles that escaped around the same time. My advice would be don't actually put in your doors on the ground floor and use a top-down system like I'm using over here, where you have a ladder leading up to the door so that your duplicants can get in that way. That actually makes it so that they can't get any regolith in your doorway to block it. But I had already done most of the design at this point, and I already had 2 doors put in, so I wasn't too worried. I haven't done a redesign on this. Now, next up is actually getting them the regolith. Now, if you want to feed these manually using duplicants, it is extremely labor intensive. I mean, it is absolutely insane. So your best bet is to ship them in using conveyors. I have these hooked up to 2 conveyor lines and I'm pumping in the regolith that way. However, these things eat an awful amount of regolith. It is insane how much regolith they can consume. And 1 second, I'm just going to put on auto wrangle here. So these 2 lines are bringing in 20 kilos of regolith a second. So that's 40 kilos of regolith are going in here, and even with just 20 voles, they will eat their way through that in no time at all. Okay, so this is the system I have come up with to deal with farming regolith. This is the same solar build I used before. This is my solar area for collecting sunlight, and the regolith here will accumulate on the top two tiles, and when the doors open after a meteor shower, it drops down here, the mining drills break it up, and then it all is just lies here on the bottom ready for collection. Now there's quite a few downsides to dealing with masses of regolith. It has to counteract the sheer power of voles. Now the first is, in a complete vacuum, the autosweepers won't exchange heat with anything. So this is a problem. They produce 2 units of heat per second of operation, and you're going to be running them overtime. The conveyor loaders themselves also generate uh, 2 units of heat per second of operation as well. So these two things will start to overheat rapidly in a vacuum. Trying to put them on top of liquid and all that, it makes this much more complicated. So what I've started doing to cool them down is I actually pump in gas. Since I've been shutting down my Slickster farm, I have about 1.5 kilos of carbon dioxide that I have no use for. This acts as a medium. I dump it in here. The drywall tiles in the background keep the gas from immediately dissipating into space. And this allows some temperature transfer to happen between the regolith and the auto sweepers and the conveyor loaders. And as well as that, these mining drills have that cooling going on that we covered earlier, so that's also helping cool down the whole area. This keeps them all running at a fairly decent temperature. Usually they don't go above 300 degrees. I've seen some of them go up to about 350 if they're working overtime. This one I prioritized just to see what had happened, and it got up as high as about 350 before we eventually ran out of regolith there. Unfortunately, there are several downsides to pumping in atmosphere here. Carbon dioxide interferes with the scanners themselves. So these scanners have zero quality at the moment. That's because the carbon dioxide that I'm pumping in here is causing interference. Secondly, it also interferes with light. The lux level up here is 36,900, and down here it's 36,000. So basically 900 lux got lost between the top and the bottom. That's because the carbon dioxide is soaking up the light. If you look here, actually, this is probably the worst yet, 32,000. That's directly below the vent. The vent is right there. So these things are actually decreasing the efficiency of my solar panels by maybe 1%, maybe 2%. Haven't done the exact figures, but it hasn't actually impacted me too much. So that's probably the smallest impact. The biggest impact is causing these space scanners to be useless. I'm actually relying currently on a naked space scanner. You'll see we're just shipping in everything, and I'm just using 2 shipping rails because one was just not enough to keep up with the regular consumption rates of the actual voles themselves. Now, when it comes to voles, even with these 2 lines feeding in, I normally limit this to 20 voles. The reason I limit to 20 voles is I don't really need any more than that, and I want to harvest them regularly to get the meat for barbecue. Now, once these are set to auto wrangle, they will actually be picked up and they will be brought over here to a kill room, which I will cover once one of them gets brought there. In the meantime, this room is filled with oxygen. The only reason I put the atmosphere in here was to allow a heat transfer between the actual auto sweepers and well, pretty much everything in here to keep it cool. The incoming regolith is actually acting as a coolant, so it helps keep this whole thing from overheating. So like I said, this is quite an investment setting this all up. Now, and then finally over here, I just have an automated kill chamber. What happens is this is set to pick up, well, voles and vole pups. So once the number of voles in here goes above 20, one of them gets wrangled. The duplicates bring it over here and dump it down here on this critter drop-off. Now, you need to have about 194 kilos of liquid. I have 194. I've tried it with 194 kilos of petroleum, up as high as 239 kilos of petroleum, and the voles will drown in a tile that high. However, you need to be careful here because if it goes too high, this critter drop-off will flood, and once it's flooded, they'll no longer drop off the critters at it. What will happen is occasionally this one of the voles you dump in here will vomit up a lump of regolith, and when it does, the regolith will fall down. Oh, there's the actual chunk there, and this will cause the level of petroleum here to rise, which will flood this critter drop-off. And that even after the regolith is gone, the critter drop-off won't unflood, not until you remove every single drop of liquid from it, which is why we have a steel mesh tile here beneath it. So then what happens is once a day, this device here activates, this automation sensor, and it's hooked up to the door down here. This door will open, which drops the petroleum level down below the level of the critter drop-off, at which point it stops being flooded, the door is closed shortly thereafterwards, and it goes back to becoming an effective kill room. I'll just let some, yep, there's one of them just turned into meat now, and the rest of them will die off shortly afterwards. Now, let's actually just increase the activity duration there. See, petroleum level drops. And then once that's done, it will go back up again. And let's see, I want to leave it at a decent size there. 2% is fine. And then it goes back to happily drowning voles. Another thing that can happen is they can occasionally drop off an egg in here. Nothing really much you can do about it. I just make sure it's also an iron box with a steel door. Once the vole hatches, it will keep crawling around the outside edges and you'll have to manually kill it. But at least with this system, you can automate the destruction of the voles so that you have a fresh supply of meat constantly dumping into your system. Now, if I had to redesign this again, I probably would have placed another row of metal tiles here and moved this drill back one tile. I wasn't aware that these actually robo-miners work under liquid. I had no idea. I would move this back to placing it here instead, and that way it wouldn't get entombed. If a lump of regolith comes down this side, it gets entombed, and this drill had to cover it. Instead, just place it back one more tile, make the room an extra 2 tiles wider, but it simplifies things just quite a bit. I was also going to put in automation to ship this down to my base, but honestly, my frame rate has gone my updates per second have plummeted. I can't really do any more large-scale building projects anymore. I'm going to have to kill this save shortly. Some final notes. Voles can't jump 2 tiles. They can only jump one, so placing them with 2 tiles away from the nearest wall means they can't actually escape this area. If you had this wall 1 tile closer, the voles could actually jump onto the wall and get out of there. So just bear that in mind. They can't jump 2 tiles. For example, you'll see here this room here they're in. Even if they did get out, they can get around the outside, but they can't actually jump across to any associated areas, which means they're kind of stuck going around this box here. You don't want voles getting out. They're really annoying to deal with. So make sure wherever you place them or whatever you do with them, it's always a 2 tile gap between whatever they're in and anywhere they could potentially escape to. Even if a vole escapes out of this box, it can only run around the outside and get no further. There is currently a bug with the critter feeders. I checked online. No one seems to know how to deal with it. Occasionally, what will happen here is if you look at these feeders here, they're full of regolith, but the voles are not eating from them. This happens occasionally. I think it has something to do with them getting regolith getting vomited up on them, and then when it's removed, the voles no longer feed from it. I think it might be something to do with maybe a vole was about to eat from it before it got vomited on, and then that causes an interruption that causes a problem. So slowly and over time, all of these critter feeders will stop working, fill up, and then the voles will no longer eat from it. So you kind of have to come back every so often, and the only way to actually make it work is if you actually just unselect food and then actually add it back in again. Once you do that, they'll actually go back to their normal happy selves and they will actually start feeding from that feeder again. My advice, just dump in lots of feeders at first. I haven't been able to find a way to completely automate this yet, and hopefully they will actually resolve this bug at some time in the future. Oh, the reason I have these 2 metal tiles, or it's 2 metal tiles wide beneath here, is I actually tried experimenting putting doors underneath these to try and reset the feeders. It didn't work, but yeah, there's no need to actually have 2 tiles wide of metal below them. That was just a part of an experimental test I was trying to do to get those feeders working. Different gases have different effects on light. So if you were to actually, instead of using carbon dioxide up here, use oxygen, oxygen does not affect light levels, so it would keep your solar panels operating at 100% capacity. However, I was willing to take the 1% hit in light levels just because I got enough power as it is, and this gas is actually waste gas, so it has no other purpose at the moment anyway. Additionally, to actually waste oxygen up here on something like this, I only have 3 kilos of water per second on this map renewable. So I just literally do not have the water to waste on flooding this whole area with oxygen.